Good evening. Tonight we bring you Mr. Cuttlefish's Love Story by the inimitable Baroness Orczy. This story was first published in 1895 in her first English work, Old Hungarian Fairy Tales. This is a whimsical love story between a cuttlefish and a mermaid, although, for some reason, the extensive original illustrations all depict an octopus. But more on that after the story. Regardless of that petty detail, let's open our imaginations and begin. There was a great commotion in the coral palace of the Queen of the Sea. It was very plain that something unusual was happening in the otherwise peaceful dwelling at the bottom of the deep blue sea. As a rule, on hot summer evenings, the Queen reclined lazily on a bed of pink seashell, while her two mermaids-in-waiting stood near her, fanning her with tall fans made of shark fins, and telling her all the latest news that occurred among the upper 10 of the fish kingdom. Everything had to be kept very quiet during that time, as the Queen objected to every kind of noise that might disturb her if she chose to take a nap, which she usually did. But on this particular evening the royal palace wore a totally different aspect. The bed of seashell was deserted, the fans of shark fins lay idle on the ground, and not a fish was visible in any of the pink coral halls. Stay, that is not quite correct. When I say not a fish could be seen, I mean not a whole fish, for at every crevice, every window, and every door there were rows and rows of tails, the heads and bodies of their owners being thrust out as far as possible. Apparently, they were intent on watching a most amusing spectacle, for every now and then those tails shook with suppressed laughter, making the water foam and bubble all around. The Queen herself so far forgot her dignity as to sit at a half-opened window and gaze out into the blue depths and clap her hands with glee and laugh until the tears streamed down her cheeks. What so evidently excited the mirth of Her Majesty and all of her subjects was certainly, to any impartial observer, a most amusing sight. Under the shades of the giant seaweed, in the grounds of the coral palace, Mr. Cuttlefish was making love to dear little Marina, the Queen's favorite mermaid, whose amorous glances quite equaled his own. He rolled his great goggle eyes at her and surrounded her graceful little form with 5 of his long arms. "My dearest, I'm afraid we must part," she was saying to him. "And I don't think I can possibly meet you out here again. I'm sure someone will see us. The palace is so near, and the windows of the great hall look out on this part of the grounds, and," she added, kissing his great puffy cheek, "I know the Queen will never consent to our marriage. You have no appointment at court, and your business compels you to live in quite another part of the sea. I must remain near the Queen, or by our laws I should lose the human half of my body and become a fish altogether, probably a sole or some other nasty flat thing. What a come-down for me, dear. I've always been accounted so sharp." Mr. Cuttlefish did not appreciate jokes which were not his own, and would have administered a severe rebuke to Marina for venturing to make one at so serious a moment. She, however, looked so pretty, and was evidently so much in love with him, poor dear, that he merely withdrew 2 or 3 of his arms from around her waist to show his displeasure. This act of unnecessary cruelty brought tears to the eyes of poor little Marina. "Well, my dear," he said, when harmony was once more restored between them, "you must try and find out whether there is not some good appointment vacant at court, and I will immediately apply for and obtain it. There were several reasons why I withdrew myself from court life altogether. I will leave you to guess those reasons, dear Marina. As a matter of fact, Her Majesty herself lately intimated to her subjects her desire for a fitting helpmate through the cares of state, and when she announced this attention in public—"
"Well, well."
"Well, you won't be jealous, dear Marina?"
"Jealous? Why?"
Well, the fact is,
said Mr. Cuttlefish, now blushing to the tips of his fingers, or rather suckers,
that Her Majesty deigned to cast eyes of approval on one of her subjects who, modesty forbids me to name.
"Oh," said Marina, clasping her hands in awed reverence. "Then you would be king of us all."
Well, yes, my dear, I believe that would have been my position,"
said Mr. Cuttlefish, modestly covering his eyes with an arm or two and wiping a humble tear.
"What was that?"
he added, in sudden alarm, as a loud peal of irrepressible laughter from the hidden spectators of this dainty scene echoed through the grounds. "Nothing, my dearest. Only a difference of opinion, I expect, between two pikes in Her Majesty's kitchen. They never can agree on the way in which a minnow should be sliced, and quarrel over it in a most rowdy manner." Mr. Cuttlefish thought to himself that he would not even slice a pike for that matter, but said nothing. Suddenly little Marina had an idea. "I'll tell you what, dear Mr. Cuttlefish, I believe there is a vacant appointment at court. It's a very lucrative one, I know, and one to which I think you are peculiarly suited. Her Majesty's royal musician died the other day. One of the choir swallowed him accidentally while singing a bass solo. I know you have a great talent for music, and, you see, none of your choir could possibly succeed in swallowing you."
"That is so," said Mr. Cuttlefish. "And how do you think I could best succeed in obtaining this appointment?"
"By thoroughly convincing the Queen of your musical capabilities. I should say if you could get an orchestra together and a few soloists, you might obtain permission to perform before Her Majesty. That is," added little Marina, "if your modesty will allow you to stand once more before her after the forward advances she made to you." At this point the laughter in the palace became so uproarious that all the sea around became a wilderness of foam and bubbles. Little Marina ran home in dismay, terrified lest she should have been seen, and Mr. Cuttlefish sailed away more rapidly than dignity generally allows. Modesty had now got the better of him, and he thought it prudent to retire for the night to his cavern between the rocks. The next day all was quiet and peaceful in the beautiful kingdom under the sea. The light shone like brilliant emeralds through the water, illuminating the coral grottos and lighting their fantastic forms with innumerable points of glittering sparks. The great branches of giant seaweed waved to and fro with slow, rhythmic cadence, and the ribbonweed floated gracefully, forming myriads of little ripples. There was a general air of festivity pervading the whole of the royal palace. Every little fish seemed to have donned his gayest colors, and all the crabs and lobsters seemed to have assumed an air of being very busy and pressed for time. Suddenly a most singular sound echoed through all the neighboring caverns and caused a general commotion in the waters. It penetrated as far as the Queen's bedchamber, where Her Majesty was enjoying a quiet rest while reflecting over the events of the night before. She had forbidden all her court to make the slightest allusion to them before her little mermaid, as it might distress her to feel that she and her lover had been so openly laughed at. She was a dear, kind-hearted sort of queen, and really very fond of little Marina, so she determined to smooth the path of true love as much as lay in her power. In the meantime the noise was growing louder and louder, and more distinct. Now it resembled a grampus blowing through his nose, and now it seemed like 100 engines letting steam off all at once. At last an unusually discordant note resounded through the royal bedchamber, and Her Majesty, now fully aroused, and not at all pleased at being disturbed in her nap, dispatched an attendant crab to inquire the cause of this extraordinary commotion. He came back with the startling news that Mr. Cuttlefish was preparing for a grand concert, which he proposed to give that very afternoon. "But," said the Queen, addressing no one in particular, "I did not know the gentleman was musical." "He is not," said an old thornback spitefully. but he fancies he is, and likes to be thought a distinguished amateur and musical critic. He wrote a very severe article in the Fly Fancier's Gazette on the subject of Your Majesty's choir.
In which, said the Nautilus indignantly, he disapproved of my voice.
And distinctly hinted that we sang flat, exclaimed the chorus of crabs.
And,
added the oysters, opening their shells and looking defiantly around,
that we have no notion of time.
A wail of indignation rose at these complaints against Mr. Cuttlefish. However, the Queen was determined to try and make matters as pleasant for Marina as possible and influence public opinion in her lover's favor as far as she could. She wished to hear more about the concert.
May it please your Majesty, said a little bony fish who seemed well posted up on all the news. Mr. Cuttlefish issued cards of invitation early this morning, but the Grand Chamberlain, the Right Honourable Tortoise, who is offended with him about something or another, has evidently withheld your Majesty's card. As for me, I shall certainly not go. He does not mention the word supper, and I don't believe there will be any.
While all this was going on, poor little Marina felt on thorns. She grew hot and cold alternately, and hardly knew how to hold herself erect on her tail while fanning the Queen. The concert was evidently now in full swing. The waters around were continually disturbed by crowds of fishes trooping to join in it and carrying their cards of invitations under their fins. The Queen was now quite unable to check her curiosity any longer, and announced her gracious intention to honor the concert by her august presence. Lord Chamberlain Tortoise, who had been simply dying to go himself, but of course did not dare show his eagerness before Her Majesty, now stalked off in high glee to order the royal mermen, who always conveyed the Queen, to be in readiness. Her Majesty mounted one of them, while another swam in front, both blowing a shell trumpet. Marina and the other little sea maids brought up the rear, carrying the fans, handkerchiefs, and smelling salts. On seeing the Queen approach, Mr. Cuttlefish bade the music cease, then rose with great ceremony and bowed 3 times, as did all the other fishes present, while the oysters, whose absence of legs forbade them to bow, clapped their shells respectfully. Mr. Cuttlefish extended one of his arms and, taking the Queen's hand, led her to a seat on a large green rock covered with beautiful anemones. Seating himself, with a look at Marina which conveyed to her the expression of his endless love, he took a great trumpet in one hand, seized a drumstick in another, a pair of cymbals and a concertina in 4 more. A large lobster then gravely announced that Mr. Cuttlefish would play a grand march composed by himself, entitled The Good Old Sharks, and would be assisted in the performance by a full choir, selected and trained by himself. The words and music were alike impressive, the orchestration eminently modern, and the chorus written in 4 parts. 3 huge frogs, rolling their goggle eyes, rolled out the bass. The herrings sang alto in sentimental style, the whiting were high treble, and as they sang with their tails in their mouths, as all well-regulated whiting do, their voices had an additional charm. The moonfish, the trunkfish, and the gurnard were all tenors, but as they had been unavoidably prevented from attending the rehearsals, their parts did not go very well. However, the swordfish, who sang baritone, and the firefish, who sang contralto, managed to drown their mistakes pretty effectually. The conductor was a great green crab, who endeavored to keep time by waving his claws. He found this fairly easy while the slow part of the march was being performed, but in the more rapid movements no one paid any attention to him, which somewhat marred the harmony of the whole effect, but in no way interfered with the enjoyment of the performers. As for Mr. Cuttlefish's trumpet and big drum, nothing seemed to drown them. He never ceased blowing the one or beating the other, though he sometimes disengaged an available arm to administer an impressive rebuke to any of the chorus who appeared to slacken energy. In fact, the whole affair was a brilliant success, and when the piece was over, everybody clapped his shell or his fins and congratulated the composer, who took all these honors with the indifference characteristic of genius. Her Majesty desired his presence.
Mr. Cuttlefish advanced, and, bending exceedingly low, humbly waited her gracious pleasure. "We are very pleased with the extraordinary talent, sir, displayed by you this afternoon. In fact, our royal ears have never been struck by so large a volume of sound. We will therefore appoint you our royal musician with a fitting salary, and give you the hand of our favorite sea maiden, Marina, in marriage." Mr. Cuttlefish cast a grateful look at his sovereign, who, taking a shark's fin in her hand and smiting him on top of his bald head, added, "Rise, Sir Cuttlefish. We confer this honor upon you for your distinguished talents and for the pleasure you have given us this afternoon." Sir Cuttlefish wished to raise a modest protest against so much honor, but eventually thought better of it, and accepted it all with the noble resignation of the really great. The lobster now announced a dance. Sir Cuttlefish opened the ball by standing on his head and whirling all his arms about till the water foamed, while everybody did their best to make the evening lively by turning over and over and round and round. The shrimps waltzed together, while the eels curled themselves up first one way and then the other. When they were all tired out, the supper was brought in by 25 green tortoises. It was the most magnificent repast, consisting of crayfish, minnows, and some deliciously prepared carp. Sir Cuttlefish ate 500 of these, which proved to be an injudicious quantity. There was a slight stir toward the end of the supper, caused by the sharks, who had not been invited, gobbling up some of the company, but on the whole the evening passed off very pleasantly. After supper the gathering broke up, Sir Cuttlefish seeing the Queen home. Next day the great composer was suffering from a detestable fit of indigestion. The poor Queen had a fearful headache, but nevertheless she had never enjoyed herself so much in all her life. The wedding of Sir Cuttlefish and Marina was fixed for an early date, and the Queen did the bride the great honor of not only being present at the ceremony, but of holding a reception at the palace. All the court officials were ordered to be present, and the poor Lord Chamberlain Tortoise had his hands full, what with issuing the invitation cards, setting the order of precedence, and making arrangements for the breakfast. The Queen ordered that everything should be conducted in the best style, and expense should be no obstacle to the success of the entertainment. Meanwhile, Sir Cuttlefish was busy. He chose the leader of his choir for his best fish. Then he ordered the lobsters to make the ring of pearl, and it took no little ingenuity on their part to round off and polish it to Sir Cuttlefish's satisfaction. The happy bridegroom also presented his bride with a brooch made of sea diamonds in a shape like a big drum, a perfect work of art, in commemoration of the great concert that had proved such a triumph. Needless to add, I think, that the deep-sea orchestra and choir played and sang the wedding march and hymns, the new R.M., royal musician, having drilled them himself most carefully. On the great day, Sir Cuttlefish got himself up in the most sumptuous style. He had ordered 4 pairs of white gloves. You see, he had 8 arms. This was looked upon as a piece of most extravagant folly, and the shark, who had not yet got over his annoyance at not being asked to the concert, made some very unpleasant remarks on the subject in his paper, The Fisherman's Foe. The gorgeousness of the ceremony and the splendor of the wedding breakfast it were vain to attempt to relate, for they even threw the glories of Cuttlefish's concert and the fete into the shade. The bridegroom borrowed a most beautiful grotto in which to pass his honeymoon, and also spent much time in having his own house thoroughly done up and repaired, and in that newly decorated house under the sea, dear little readers, we will leave the happy pair, for in it they have lived in joy and prosperity from that day to this. The best sentence in this story is this little section. Mr. Cuttlefish did not appreciate jokes which were not his own, and would have administered a severe rebuke to Marina for venturing to make one at so serious a moment. She, however, looked so pretty, and was evidently so much in love with him, poor dear, that he merely withdrew 2 or 3 of his arms from round her waist to show his displeasure. This
love story will go out a bit late for Valentine's Day this year, but it is so charming. In the beginning, when everyone in the palace is laughing at them, I thought that this might be a kind of mean story where everybody's making fun of Mr. Cuttlefish. Instead, it is surprisingly sweet. The queen sincerely wishes them well and supports their marriage, and everybody is kind and polite to the ridiculous couple, no matter how silly he is. Everyone has a fantastic time at the incredible concert, and everybody happily celebrates the wedding. It's a lovely little love story. It also has a bit of Alice in Wonderland to me, something about all the undersea creatures with all their different instruments and their dances and their behaviors feels very Lewis Carroll. It doesn't have quite that fever dream quality. It is kind of weird that the feast is fish. And it's weird to me that they are all various kinds of sea creatures, and yet they're also very specifically eating various sea creatures and sometimes each other. The pretext of Baroness Orczy's old Hungarian fairy tales is that she is providing an English translation of stories she enjoyed as a child. I do think that's probably the case for Uletka and the White Lizard, a story of hers that I did on this channel last year. In this case, however, I just don't see how that can be true. I think this story must be an original work. It doesn't have any of the incomprehensible behavior and bizarre plot lines of really old stories. This story is very structured, it's very mannered, it's very indicative of the Baroness's own social class and the customs of her era. Also, Hungary is a landlocked country without any substantial maritime traditions other than holidays at Lake Balaton. I mean, even in the furthest extent of Austro-Hungary, it barely had any seacoast. I think that this being an original work also explains the inexplicable depiction in the illustrations of Mr. Cuttlefish as an octopus rather than a cuttlefish. I think that if she just made up the story and then she and her husband illustrated it without any other input, this might be what they came up with. Speaking of illustrations, they were mostly done by her husband, Henry Montague Barstow, and they are gorgeous. The original edition of this book was more like an illuminated manuscript with text and images interwoven on every page, but I have not found any digitized version of the original book. Only the text and these images separate from each other and at terrible resolution. I've done what I can for the purposes of this video. If you listen all the way to the end of the video, you get to hear me make a little confession. This week's confession is that a few weeks ago, I posted a poll on the community tab asking what kind of stories you guys like. And to be totally honest, I posted that poll mainly because I wasn't going to post a video that week, but I did want to put some kind of content out there. I mean, I am curious about what you guys like and are interested in, but that really wasn't my biggest motivation. However, I am super pleased with the results. I know only 20-some people voted, but of course those are the 20-some people who are the most active and engaged in the channel, and it seems like we are really in agreement about what we like and the content we want to create, which is so exciting for me. It also helps me focus up a bit because there is, of course, several lifetimes worth of old literature out there to explore, and it is helpful to kind of narrow the scope of my research. Of course, that poll is still up on the community tab if you missed it and you still want to chime in, but it is a relief to know that even when the algorithm doesn't quite get me, you guys do. This is Restored Lore, where every week I bring you odd and unusual stories from around the world. If you like that kind of thing, please subscribe to the channel and choose notifications so you never miss a story. Please also drop a like on this video and consider sharing it with someone who would enjoy it. It really does help the channel. Have a great week, everybody. Love you.